First Contact and Prejudice. Commander Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the Galactic Defense Academy's observation deck, watching the triple suns of the Centauri system paint the sky in shades of amber and violet. Her reflection showed a compact woman in her late 30s, standard Earth military uniform, pressed to perfection, dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. To the casual observer, she might have appeared calm, but her fingers drummed a silent rhythm against her thigh, the only outward sign of her inner tension. "Commander Chen," a resonant voice echoed through the chamber. "Your presence is unexpected." She turned to face High Marshal Kovacs, the Academy's commandant. The Arcturians stood nearly 3 meters tall, their crystalline exoskeleton refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. Like most species in the Galactic Defense Force, they viewed humans as an evolutionary oddity. Soft-bodied creatures who had somehow managed to achieve spaceflight despite their obvious physical limitations. "High Marshal," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "I trust you received the Council's directive regarding Earth's inclusion in the training program." Kovacs's crystalline features shifted in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. Though I must admit, when they said Earth was sending an instructor, I expected someone more substantial." Sarah had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times since humanity joined the Galactic Alliance. Every species had their advantages: the Arcturians with their crystalline strength, the Volari with their natural bioelectric fields, the Xanthari with their telepathic abilities. Humans, by comparison, seemed woefully ordinary. "I reviewed the files of my assigned squad," Sarah said, changing the subject. "Elite warriors, all of them. The best their respective worlds have to offer." "Correct." Kovacs moved to the viewport, their crystalline form creating rainbow patterns on the deck. "Which makes your assignment all the more peculiar. These warriors require advanced combat training, not—" They paused, searching for a diplomatic phrase. "Not lessons from a fragile human." Sarah completed the thought. "With respect, High Marshal, perhaps that's exactly what they need." Before Kovacs could respond, the chamber's doors parted to admit 5 figures, Sarah's new squad. They filed in with varying degrees of grace: a Volari warrior crackling with barely contained energy, a massive Xanthari whose telepathic presence filled the room like thunder, a sleek Nixian assassin whose shadow seemed to move independently, a towering Arcturian youth, and a Meridian whose liquid metal form rippled with barely concealed disdain. "Warriors," Kovacs announced, "meet your new combat instructor, Commander Chen of Earth." The silence that followed was deafening. Then the Volari, Zexri, let out a bark of laughter that sent sparks dancing across their skin. "This is a joke, yes? Some test of our patience." Sarah met their gaze steadily. "No joke, Warrior Zexri. Though I understand your confusion. You're probably wondering what someone like me could possibly teach warriors like you." The thought had occurred. The Nixian, Shadow Singer, purred. Their voice was like silk over steel, each word carrying centuries of genetic memory. Sarah smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the Xanthari thought weaver pause in their telepathic probing. "Then let's start with your first lesson. Right now, each of you is thinking about how easily you could defeat me in combat. The Volari's planning to unleash an electromagnetic pulse. The Nixians calculating the fastest way to strike from the shadows. The Xanthari's trying to read my mind to anticipate my moves. The Arcturians considering simply crushing me, and the Meridians wondering if they could simply engulf and dissolve me." The squad shifted uncomfortably. Her accuracy was unsettling. "And that," Sarah continued, "is exactly why you'd all fail. Because you're thinking like warriors who've never truly faced defeat, who've never had to think beyond their natural advantages, who've never had to adapt." She began to pace, her boots clicking against the deck in a steady rhythm. "Humans don't have crystal skin or bioelectric fields. We can't read minds, or shape-shift, or move through shadows. We're soft, relatively weak, and painfully mortal. And yet, here I stand, chosen to train the elite of the galaxy. Would you like to know why?" The meridian, flux, rippled in what might have been curiosity. Enlighten us, Commander. Because humans have spent their entire history being the underdogs. We've faced predators faster and stronger than us, survived environments that should have killed us, and overcome obstacles that should have been impossible. We didn't do it with natural weapons or special abilities. We did it by thinking differently, by adapting, by turning our weaknesses into strengths. She stopped pacing and faced them directly. That's what I'm here to teach you. Not how to be stronger or faster or more lethal. You're already exceptional at that. I'm here to teach you how to think like someone who can't rely on natural advantages. Because someday you might face an enemy who negates your strengths, and when that day comes, you'll need more than raw power to survive. The squad exchanged glances. The Zenthuri's telepathic presence receded slightly, shifting from dismissive to contemplative. The Valeri's electric field stabilized, indicating focused attention. Tomorrow, Sarah announced, we begin combat training. I recommend you all get some rest. You're going to need it. As the squad filed out, High Marshal Kovacs remained behind. An interesting approach, Commander Chen. Sarah turned back to the viewport, watching as one of the system's suns dipped below the horizon. They're used to instructors who try to impress them with displays of power. But humans learned long ago that true strength isn't about who has the biggest muscles or the sharpest claws. It's about who can think their way out of an impossible situation. And you believe you can teach them this human perspective. Sarah's reflection smiled in the viewport. No, High Marshal. I'm going to let them discover it for themselves. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that hurt a little. As she left the observation deck, Sarah could feel the weight of what lay ahead. These warriors would resist, they would doubt, and they would probably hate her methods. But by the time she was done with them, they would understand why humanity had earned its place among the stars, not through strength or special abilities, but through something far more powerful, the unrelenting human drive to overcome any obstacle, adapt to any challenge, and succeed against all odds. The real question wasn't whether she could teach them. The real question was whether they were ready to learn. Breaking expectations. The training arena hummed with anticipation as Sarah's squad assembled for their first session. The vast chamber could simulate any environment, from scorching deserts to frozen wastelands. Today, it was configured as a simple sparring ground with observation platforms hovering at various heights. Your first task is simple, Sarah announced, standing before her towering students. Disable me. Zexri's bioelectric field crackled with amusement. You cannot be serious, Commander. One touch from me would overload your nervous system. Probably, Sarah agreed. But first, you have to touch me. She raised her hand, revealing a small remote. Begin. The arena's lights dimmed to quarter strength. Shadow Singer immediately melted into the darkness, their natural camouflage making them nearly invisible. Thought Weaver extended their telepathic field, trying to predict Sarah's movements. The Arcturian, Crystal Forge, took a defensive stance, while Flux began to spread their liquid metal form across the floor. Sarah stood perfectly still, watching. Shadow Singer struck first, emerging from the darkness behind her with preternatural speed. Sarah didn't turn. Instead, she pressed a button on her remote. A focused sonic pulse erupted from hidden speakers, disrupting the Nixians' shadow form and forcing them back into visibility. Lesson 1. Sarah said calmly, never rely on your primary advantage. Shadow Singer, you're so used to being invisible that you never considered I might have a counter prepared. Before the others could process this, she pressed another button. The arena's temperature plummeted. Flux's liquid metal form began to slow, their molecular structure struggling to maintain cohesion in the sudden cold. Lesson 2. Environmental awareness. Meridians are nearly invincible in normal conditions, but extreme temperatures are your weakness. In real combat, your enemy will exploit that. Zexri launched forward, electricity arcing between their appendages. Sarah dropped and rolled, revealing a thin conductive mat beneath her previous position. The Volari's charge grounded instantly, dispersing harmlessly. Lesson 3. Control your power. Raw energy isn't enough. You need precision. Thoughtweaver pushed harder with their telepathy, trying to breach Sarah's mental defenses. She smiled, wondering why you can't read my thoughts clearly. Human minds are messy. We think in patterns your telepathy isn't designed to process. Another weakness you never considered. Crystal Forge finally moved, their crystalline form catching what little light remained in rainbow refractions. They charged forward, nearly impossible to dodge in the confined space. Sarah didn't dodge. Instead, she pressed one final button. The arena's gravity reversed. The Arcturian, unused to sudden shifts in orientation, tumbled upward. The others, similarly caught off guard, struggled to adjust. Only Sarah remained in place, magnetic boots humming softly. Final lesson for today. Adaptability. You all have incredible natural abilities, but you've become dependent on them. When they're negated, you're lost. She restored normal gravity, allowing her squad to recover. They gathered around her, their earlier dismissiveness replaced with cautious respect. But we cannot always predict our enemies' counters, Crystal Forge protested, their crystalline voice resonating with frustration. Exactly, Sarah nodded. Which is why you need to learn to fight without your advantages. Starting tomorrow, we train using only basic physical abilities. No powers, no special traits. That's impossible. Flux rippled indignantly. Our abilities are part of who we are. Your abilities are tools, Sarah corrected. And like any tool, they can be taken away or countered. When that happens, what's left? That's what we're here to discover. Over the next few weeks, Sarah put her squad through increasingly challenging scenarios. They trained in null power fields that negated their natural abilities. They learned to fight blindfolded underwater in zero gravity. Every session was designed to push them beyond their comfort zones. The breakthrough came during a capture the flag exercise. Stripped of their powers, the squad finally began working together, using basic strategy and coordination instead of relying on individual strengths. Shadow Singer proved remarkably agile, even without their shadow walking. Thoughtweaver developed an uncanny knack for reading body language when their telepathy was blocked. Zexri learned to fight with precision rather than raw power. After one particularly successful session, High Marshal Kovacs observed from the command center. Remarkable progress, Commander Chen. Though your methods are unconventional. Sarah watched as her squad ran combat drills, moving with a coordination that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. Humans had to learn early that it's not the strongest who survive, but the most adaptable. These warriors are finally beginning to understand that. And if they face an enemy who can't negate their abilities, then they'll be even more formidable. Sarah smiled. Because now they don't depend on those abilities. They're learning to think tactically, to analyze situations, to work together. Everything else is just a bonus. As if to prove her point, Crystal Forge and Flux executed a perfect tandem maneuver, one they'd developed during power null training. Their movements were precise, economical, nothing wasted. There's an old Earth saying, Sarah continued, necessity is the mother of invention. When you can't overpower your opponent, you have to outthink them. That's humanity's greatest strength. We never stop finding new ways to solve problems. The squad gathered for their end-of-session briefing, tired but satisfied. There was a new confidence in their bearing now, different from their earlier arrogance. This was the quiet assurance of warriors who knew they could handle whatever challenges came their way. Tomorrow, Sarah announced, we put everything together. Powers and physical training combined. Let's show the galaxy what happens when you blend natural abilities with human ingenuity. As her squad filed out, Sarah caught fragments of their conversation. Jokes about their initial dismissiveness, plans for combining their abilities in new ways, discussions of tactical theory. They were no longer just powerful warriors. They were becoming something more. They were becoming adaptable. The crisis. The alert came during a routine training session. Red emergency lights bathed the Academy's corridors in crimson as the facility's AI announced, "Critical containment failure in Xenobiology Lab Delta. Class 4 biohazard breach detected. All personnel evacuate immediately." Sarah's squad was halfway through a complex maneuver when the sirens began. She watched their reactions carefully. A month ago, they would have charged off individually, each confident in their own abilities. Now they instinctively gathered around her, awaiting assessment. "Status report," Sarah commanded, patching into the Academy's emergency channel. High Marshal Kovacs's voice crackled through her comm. "Commander Chen, we have a situation. A research specimen has escaped containment, a void leech from the Carina Nebula. It's currently in the ventilation system, growing exponentially." Sarah's blood ran cold. Void leeches were notorious spaceborne parasites that fed on energy itself. In their natural habitat, they kept the deadly void storms of Carina in check, in an enclosed space like the Academy. "How long until total system failure?" she asked. 20 minutes maximum. "The creature is absorbing power faster than we anticipated. Standard containment protocols are ineffective. It simply consumes the energy from our barriers." The squad listened intently. Shadow Singer's darkness rippled with concern. "These creatures, they are immune to most forms of attack, yes." "Correct," Sarah confirmed. "Energy weapons are useless. Physical attacks pass right through them. They're virtually invulnerable while feeding." "Then how do we fight it?" Crystal Forge demanded. Sarah smiled grimly. "We don't. We outthink it. Zexri, what happens to your bioelectric field in extremely cold temperatures?" The Volari's eyes widened in understanding. "It contracts. Becomes more concentrated." "Exactly. Flux, your liquid form. Maximum operating temperature. 3000 Kelvin, the meridian rippled. Beyond that, molecular cohesion becomes difficult to maintain." "Thought Weaver, can you sense the creature's consciousness?" The Zenthari's telepathic presence probed outward. "Barely. Its thoughts are alien, primitive, but there is a pattern. Hunger, always hunger." Sarah nodded. "Right. Here's the plan. This thing feeds on energy, but like any organism, it can be overwhelmed. We're going to give it indigestion." She quickly outlined her strategy. It was risky, borderline insane, but it played to each of their strengths while accounting for their limitations, exactly what they'd been training for. The squad moved through the darkening corridors with practiced precision. The Academy's power was failing rapidly, emergency systems flickering as the void leech drained them. Through the walls, they could hear its feeding, a sound like static electricity mixed with grinding metal. "Phase 1, Sarah whispered. Shadow Singer melted into the remaining shadows, their form barely visible as they approached the nearest ventilation access. With practiced ease, they removed the panel and slipped inside. Their role was crucial. They would herald the creature through the ducts, using their shadow form to appear as a tempting energy source. Phase 2. Thought Weaver extended their telepathic presence, not to attack the creature directly, but to project an irresistible sensation of energy-rich environments. The Void Leech responded, its massive form surging through the ventilation system toward their position. Phase 3. Crystal Forge and Flux took their positions. The Arcturian's crystalline form began to vibrate at precisely calculated frequencies, while the meridians spread themselves in a carefully measured pattern across the floor. Phase 4. Zexri's bioelectric field crackled to maximum intensity, drawing the creature's attention. The Void Leech emerged from the ventilation shaft. A writhing mass of translucent tissue shot through with bolts of captured energy. It was easily the size of a transport ship now, its feeding tendrils reaching hungrily toward the Volari's energy signature. Hold, Sarah commanded. The creature drew closer. Hold. Its feeding tendrils were almost touching Zexri's field. Now, everything happened in precise sequence. Zexri released their entire charge at once, not at the creature, but into Crystal Forge's crystalline matrix. The Arcturian's body, vibrating at the exact resonant frequency it calculated, amplified, and redirected the energy through specifically grown crystal facets. The supercharged energy beam struck Flux's liquid metal form, which had spread into a precise parabolic reflector array. The meridian's surface, heated to exactly 2,999 Kelvin, reflected and focused the energy directly into the Void Leech's feeding centers. The creature convulsed as it tried to absorb the overwhelming surge. Shadow Singer emerged from behind it, their shadow form creating a vacuum of energy that forced the creature to retain the overload rather than disperse it. Thought Weaver's telepathic assault provided the final push, disrupting the creature's feeding instincts just enough to prevent it from rejecting the energy. The Void Leech's translucent form began to glow, brighter and brighter, as it was forced to absorb more energy than it could possibly process. With a sound like shattering glass, it collapsed in on itself, its own feeding abilities turned against it. The emergency lights flickered back to life as the Academy's systems began to recover. In the sudden brightness, Sarah's squad stood panting, exhausted, but triumphant. High Marshal Kovacs's voice came through the comm, tinged with what might have been awe. "Commander Chen, how did you know that would work?" Sarah looked at her squad. Each of them had performed their role perfectly, trusting in each other and the plan. "Because, High Marshal, we didn't try to overpower it. We didn't rely on brute force or individual abilities. We analyzed the problem, identified exploitable weaknesses, and worked together to create a solution. That's the human way." The squad gathered around her, their earlier exhaustion giving way to exhilaration. They had faced an invincible enemy and emerged victorious, not through overwhelming power, but through strategy, cooperation, and precise application of their abilities. "Well done," Sarah told them, "but don't get too comfortable. Tomorrow, we start training for situations like this. Because next time, we might not have 20 minutes to figure it out." Unity through understanding. The aftermath of the Void Leech incident rippled through the Galactic Defense Academy like a shockwave. What had started as whispered doubts about a human instructor had transformed into curious speculation. Sarah's squad found themselves the center of attention during meal periods, training sessions, and recreational hours. In the squad's private training chamber, Sarah watched as Crystal Forge and Flux demonstrated a new combat technique they'd developed. The Arcturian's crystalline form created precise prisms that redirected the Meridian's liquid metal attacks in unexpected patterns. It was an innovation that would have been impossible a month ago, when they'd all trained in isolation. "You're thinking deeply, Commander," Thought Weaver observed, their telepathic voice carrying a new note of respect. "Your mind patterns are particularly intricate today." Sarah nodded, watching the practice session. "I'm thinking about evolution, actually, not just biological, but cultural. How species adapt and learn from each other." Shadow Singer emerged from their customary shadow form, their dark features thoughtful. "You speak of our development under your training." "Partly," Sarah admitted. "But I'm also thinking about what I've learned from all of you." This caught everyone's attention. Even Zexri, who had been practicing precision charge control, turned to listen, their electrical field humming with curiosity. "You've learned from us." Crystal Forge's crystalline voice carried genuine surprise. "But we are the students." Sarah smiled. "Everyone's always both teacher and student. That's another human trait. We're endlessly curious. We advance not just by developing our own strengths, but by understanding and incorporating others' perspectives." She gestured to their training area. "Look at what you're all doing now. Crystal Forge, you're not just using your crystalline form as armor anymore. You're manipulating light and energy in ways your people never considered. Flux, your liquid metal forms have become more precise, more tactical. Shadow Singer, you've learned to use your shadow walking for more than just stealth." The Nixian nodded, their darkness rippling. "The shadows can be a bridge, not just a hiding place. I never considered this before." "Exactly," Sarah continued. And Zexri, your bioelectric control has become an art form. Thought Weaver, you're not just reading thoughts anymore. You're understanding the emotions and intentions behind them. The Zenthuri's telepathic presence warmed with acknowledgement. Human minds showed me that chaos can have its own pattern, that not all thoughts need to be ordered to be understood. But these changes, Flux rippled thoughtfully, their liquid metal form reflecting the chamber's lights in mesmerizing patterns. They came not just from your training, but from working together. That's the real lesson, Sarah agreed. Humanity didn't become a spacefaring civilization because we were the strongest, fastest, or most naturally gifted. We did it by working together, by learning from our mistakes and each other, by combining different perspectives to solve problems in new ways. She walked to the center of the training area, her squad gathering around her. Each of you came here as the elite of your species, but being elite isn't about being the best individually. It's about making everyone around you better. Crystal Forge's crystalline surface shifted, and what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a thoughtful frown. Is this why you pushed us to train without our natural abilities? To understand each other's limitations. And to understand each other's potential, Sarah corrected. When you can't rely on your strongest ability, you have to develop new ones. You have to trust your teammates. You have to innovate. Zexri's electrical field pulsed with sudden understanding. Like the Void Leech incident, we succeeded not because we were powerful, but because we understood how our abilities could work together. Shadow Singer completed the thought. Because we thought like humans, looking for unconventional solutions. Sarah nodded. Every species in the galaxy has its unique strengths, but true power comes from understanding and combining those strengths in new ways. That's what makes humanity different. We don't just adapt to challenges, we adapt to each other. The squad spent the rest of the session exploring this concept, developing new combination techniques that played to their collective strengths. Shadow Singer learned to extend their shadow form through Crystal Forge's prisms, creating multiple decoy images. Flux and Zexri worked on a technique where the Meridian's liquid metal form conducted and amplified the Valeri's electrical attacks with unprecedented precision. As the session ended, High Marshal Kovacs entered the chamber. The Arcturian administrator watched the squad's innovations with obvious interest. Your methods continue to surprise, Commander Chen, Kovacs observed. When the council insisted on including a human instructor, I expected different results. Sarah watched as her squad continued practicing, even after the formal session had ended. Different doesn't always mean worse, High Marshal. Sometimes it just means new possibilities. Indeed, Kovacs's crystalline form shifted in the light. The final evaluation approaches. Your squad will face challenges designed to test the limits of their abilities and training. They'll be ready, Sarah said confidently. Not because they're the strongest or most naturally gifted, but because they now think differently. Kovacs completed the thought. Like humans. Sarah smiled. No, High Marshal. They think like themselves, but with the understanding that there's always more to learn, always new ways to grow. That's the greatest lesson humanity can teach. As she watched her squad train, Sarah felt a deep sense of pride. They had become more than just powerful warriors. They had become innovators, problem solvers, teammates. They had learned to see limitations not as weaknesses, but as opportunities for growth and adaptation. The final evaluation would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. But Sarah knew they would face it not as individuals trying to prove their superiority, but as a unified team ready to adapt to any challenge. That was the human way. And now, it was their way too. The ultimate test. The day of the final evaluation dawned with all three suns of the Centauri system aligned in a rare celestial convergence. The entire Galactic Defense Academy had gathered to witness the event. Not just the standard performance assessment, but a challenge specifically designed to test the unorthodox training methods of the human instructor and her unusual squad. Sarah stood with her team in the preparation chamber, surrounded by the quiet hum of equipment and the tangible tension of anticipation. They've designed this test to make us fail, Zexri observed. their electrical field unusually subdued. The other instructors believe your methods have made us weak. Then let them believe it, Sarah replied, checking her equipment. Underestimation is just another advantage. High Marshal Kovacs's voice echoed through the chamber. Commander Chen, present your squad for the final evolution challenge. They entered the main arena, which had been transformed into a vast, multi-level environment. Observation platforms floated at various heights, filled with instructors, students, and diplomatic observers from dozens of worlds. Sarah noted several human representatives among them, their expressions carefully neutral. Kovacs stood at the central platform, their crystalline form refracting the light of all three suns. The challenge is simple. Your squad must retrieve 5 objective markers while defending against multiple hostile forces. The markers are scattered throughout the arena, each protected by different security measures. Additionally, you must maintain the integrity of a central control point. The hostile forces will increase in number and capability as the challenge progresses. Sarah noticed the slight emphasis on simple. This would be anything but. She could already see the tactical complexity of the arena's layout, the way certain areas seemed designed specifically to counter each of her squad members' natural abilities. Begin on my mark, Kovacs announced. 3, 2, 1. The arena erupted into chaos. Combat drones swarmed from hidden launchers, their weapons loaded with high-powered stun charges. Holographic enemies materialized, each programmed with advanced combat algorithms. Environmental hazards activated, creating zones of extreme temperature, gravitational fluctuation, and electromagnetic interference. Sarah's squad moved as one, without hesitation. Months of training had taught them to think beyond their individual strengths, to see the battlefield as a puzzle rather than just a fight. Pattern Sigma, Sarah commanded. Adapt and overcome. They split into precisely coordinated pairs. Shadow Singer and Thought Weaver moved toward the first marker, the Nixian's shadow form cloaking them, both while the Zenthuri's telepathy provided early warning of threats. Crystal Forge and Flux took the center, the Arcturian's crystalline body serving as both shield and prism, while the Meridian's liquid form flowed through their matrix in complex attack patterns. Zexri stayed with Sarah, their bioelectric field harmonizing with her tactical equipment in ways that would have seemed impossible months ago. Together, they coordinated the squad's movements, adapting their strategy as new challenges emerged. The observers watched in growing amazement as the squad faced each challenge not with brute force, but with innovative combinations of their abilities. When a gravity well threatened to trap Crystal Forge, Flux used their liquid form to create a counterbalance. When electromagnetic pulses disabled Zexri's electrical attacks, they channeled their energy through Shadow Singer's darkness, creating arcs of shadow lightning that bypassed the interference. Remarkable, one of the human observers murmured. They're not just using their abilities. They're redefining them. The final marker proved to be the greatest challenge. It was suspended in a null power field, surrounded by combat drones, and protected by energy barriers that adapted to any form of attack. A direct assault would be suicide. Sarah smiled. This was exactly what they trained for. Remember the Void Leech, she called out. Everything has a pattern. Everything has a weakness. We just have to create one. The squad moved with perfect synchronization. Crystal Forge grew a complex array of prismatic structures, while Flux flowed into precise geometric patterns around them. Shadow Singer extended their darkness through the crystals, creating a web of shadow paths. Thought Weaver's telepathy linked them all, coordinating their movements down to the millisecond. Zexri charged their electrical field to maximum capacity, but instead of attacking, they began to pulse their energy in a complex rhythm. The combination created a cascade effect. Light refracted through crystal, shadows bending space, psychic energy weaving it all together, and precisely timed electrical pulses setting up a resonance pattern. The null power field began to fluctuate, trying to adapt to an attack that wasn't quite energy, wasn't quite physical, wasn't quite anything it was designed to stop. In that moment of confusion, Sarah made her move. She sprinted through the gap in the field's coverage, snatched the marker, and dove back just as the system recalibrated. The arena fell silent as the final marker's retrieval registered. They had completed the challenge in record time, with minimal power usage and 0 casualties, a combination that should have been impossible. High Marshal Kovacs's voice carried a note of genuine respect as they announced, "Challenge completed. Commander Chen's squad has successfully demonstrated mastery of advanced combat integration and tactical innovation." The squad gathered around Sarah, tired but triumphant. They had proved that true strength came not from individual power, but from understanding how to combine different abilities in innovative ways. "Well done," Sarah told them quietly. "You've shown the galaxy something new today." "We showed them the human way," Shadow Singer replied, their darkness rippling with pride. "No," Sarah corrected with a smile. "We showed them what happens when different species learn from each other. When we stop trying to prove who's strongest and start finding ways to be stronger together." As the observation platforms descended and the congratulations began, Sarah watched her squad, no longer just elite warriors, but pioneers of a new kind of combat philosophy. They had learned to think like humans while remaining true to their own natures, creating something greater than either approach alone could achieve. The galaxy would never look at humans quite the same way again. And perhaps more importantly, these warriors would never look at themselves the same way either. They had learned that true evolution came not from becoming more powerful, but from becoming more adaptable, more innovative, more willing to learn from others. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not strength or special abilities, but the understanding that there was always another way, always room to grow, always something new to learn. And in the end, that was the greatest power of all.